introduction, my name is Pierre. I'm an urban planner. I'm French and German, and I work as a consultant for the International Center for Community Land Trust, specifically on organizing a series of events around community land trusts and climate justice. And these events are actually peer learning sessions. They're meant to exchange knowledge between practitioners in the field of community land trusts or very close allies from academia or other nonprofits who work with community land trusts. It's a global initiative, so we may have people here in the room from different continents. Of course, there are lots of CLTs from North America, from the US, and from Canada, but we also have some people from Europe and sometimes from global South countries also who are linked to our initiative. So today the topic is around food sovereignty and urban agriculture and the link between this and community land trust. And we're going to hear from three speakers. First, we'll hear from Greg Rosenberg, who many of you may know as the Executive Director of the International Center for Community Land Trusts. He also has an extensive knowledge about urban agriculture and the link to community land trusts. So he will be introducing this session, and then we will hear from Heather Benham, who is the former executive director of Lopez CLT in the I mixed it up from the Athens Land Trust, which is located in Athens in the state of Georgia, and she currently is a consultant at Burlington Associates, which works with community land trusts in the United States. And finally, we'll hear from Sandy Bishop, who is from the CLT in the Lopez Island, which is in the state of Washington in the United States. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Greg, and we'll have lots of time for questions and for discussion after the three presentations. So if you have burning questions, you can write them in the chat. But after the presentations, you will be able to speak directly or out your questions and even, yeah, of course, share from your own experiences about this topic from today. So, Greg, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Pierre. It's great to see all of you. I just looked at the participant list and I know a bunch of you, so thanks very much for coming. Community Land Trust and Agriculture is a
Just
topic.
Greg, before you start, we can see your screen doubled, so we can see a presentation on the right and a folder on the left. So if you
All right.
may try again to share.
Is that better?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Oof. We're having a few challenges collectively with our technology, but hopefully the rest will be fine. Community Land Trust and Agriculture, close to my heart. I got started with CLTs in agriculture back in 2001 with a project called Troy Gardens in Madison, Wisconsin, where I live. And that combined 30 units of co-housing, community gardens, a CSA farm, and a prairie restoration project on 31 acres. And I thought we were setting the world on fire with a whole new thing nobody ever thought of in the history of community land trusts. And it turns out it was actually an old idea. It went back to 1969, which was very cool and also humbling at the same time. CLT's roots are in agriculture and housing. We're not just housing. And if anybody tells you CLTs are just for housing, they're wrong. So just in terms of the roots of CLTs, I'm sure you're all familiar with Ebenezer Howard and the Garden City movement in the UK. I'm sure Tom Chance is quite familiar with this. And that was a key precursor to CLTs. And the first CLT, which hopefully all of you know about, is New Communities, established in 1969 on 5,000 acres. At the time, it was the largest Black-owned farm in the United States. And I know that Heather has been very involved over the years with Shirley Sherrod in particular. So yeah, this is where we got started, a project that combined agriculture and housing both. So what we're talking about today is just going back to our roots. So I just want to do a quick overview of CLTs involved in agriculture in the US, because that's kind of what I know more about. And apologies if this is a bit out of date. I put these slides together a couple of years ago. So there are three CLTs that are agriculture only. There's Boston Farms in Boston, Mass. There's the Southside Community Land Trust in Providence, Rhode Island, which is kind of by far the largest. Really encourage you to check that out. And then there's a CLT in Puerto Rico, and their executive director, Mario Reyes, is on this call. So hopefully we'll hear about her because they're doing really cool stuff in Puerto Rico. There are CLTs that do agriculture and housing. And it turns out the two I have listed here are the two that you'll be hearing about after I'm done with my overview. Athens Community Land Trust and Lopez CLT. Very, very cool organizations, and Heather and Sandy just done amazing work there. There are also CLTs where agricultural land is managed by project partners, and that is what we did at Troy Gardens, which is a project of the Madison area CLT in Madison, Wisconsin. And kind of the oldest CLT doing this type of thing is Dudley Neighbors Inc. in Boston, where they've had a multiple year collaboration with the food project that's for greenhouses and an outdoor farm as well. But any CLTs can do urban ag. If you develop single family housing, you can have backyard gardening, front yard gardening. So I just encourage you all to think about with the land that you have, how might the people who you work with grow food? One question I always got when I was doing consulting work is kind of what's the best way to start out if you're a CLT interested in agriculture, particular urban ag. And I encourage folks to partner with a well-established community garden where the CLT could negotiate for the purchase of the land and enter into a ground lease with the community garden. The stewardship burden for the CLT is pretty light, and it's a chance to learn. Just in general, try to figure out the simplest project to implement, learn from that, and then you could do more complex projects going forward. And this is the starter project, which I just talked about. And kind of the best folks to buy land from are often cities. Um, uh, so, so why urban agriculture? It builds community cohesion, and this is community gardens in particular. You're increasing capacity of local food systems, improving health outcomes. It's an opportunity to grow culturally appropriate foods and have a case study of among elders garden that I talk about sometimes. And that's a great example of that. And it's an access to affordable fresh produce. Lastly, we got some really good resources on our website. If you go to the resource section under research, you'll find land tenure for urban farming. And there's all kinds of good stuff in there. If you're interested in looking at agricultural and urban context with the CLT model. And that's it for my overview. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Greg. So we'll hear directly from Heather, and Ben is going to share the slides.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Let's see. So I guess I can start with, while he's pulling up my slides. So as Greg said, I was with the Athens Land Trust in Athens, Georgia for 21 years. And I left in the end of 2024 and joined Burlington Associates, doing consulting work supporting other community land trusts around mostly the Southeast and the United States. but this is a lot of the work that I have done. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about our journey into agriculture at the Athens Land Trust. So one of the things that a little different about maybe the Athens Land Trust is it's, I believe, the only land trust that was formed as both a conservation land trust and a community land trust. So from the very beginning, we were holding both tools in our structure. So you can go to the next slide. And I'll say that early days, it was pretty clear when you'd answer the phone what someone was calling for, what purpose. So it was often either a landowner who'd had land in their family for multiple generations, looking to protect that land from development in exchange for tax benefits, or it was a community member calling, looking for their first home, who had never had access to land or owned property before. And so over the years, a big part of our goal was to bridge those two fairly disparate functions into a more cohesive organization. So just, you guys know what CLTs are, but just to make sure, to Greg's point, it's not just about housing, it's about community uses. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And back to that, both community, like a community land trust and conservation. And I will say that the community focus was mostly really in the town that we were located in. And over time, the conservation focus became more statewide because there were opportunities to protect land. And we saw that many conservation organizations, I think historically, have come at it from a perspective of how do you protect land from people? So what ways do you put protections on to protect the ecosystem or the animals or the plant community and keep people off the land to make sure that those things are protected? And the way that we approached it pretty much from the beginning, it was, how are you protecting land in a way that benefits people and benefits communities? So early on, we were one of the only land trusts. We were the first in the state to do farmland protection. You can go to the next slide. I guess let's tell you a little about the housing portfolio. This is the kind of stuff that you guys are probably more familiar with. We were doing lots of infill housing, specific neighborhoods, some small developments, affordable rental projects. You can show a little bit more. The next slide, yeah. And it looked like all different types of things. And then the next slide. And so we were doing neighborhood revitalization. So we were taking things that had been burned out or abandoned or boarded up and trying to improve it. And then next slide. And then on the land side, we were working with landowners, just kind of what came to us. But then our focus became the farmland protection. So we were working with landowners through federal funding sources to pay people to protect their land so that it would stay as farmland. And we live in an area where there's a lot of development pressure. So farmland was being converted to sprawling neighborhoods. And so we were trying to be thoughtful ahead of time to make sure that we still had access to land that could grow food. And be an economic resource for the farmers that had been there for generations or new farmers that were coming up. Over time, to try to bridge those programs, we started getting into the education and empowerment. So what that meant was we weren't just trying to create the thing, we were trying to set people up to benefit from. So for example, on the housing side, I think when they started, they thought we will just build a house and a low to moderate income family will be so happy to buy that house and that will change their life. And then pretty quickly we realized, oh, wait, we need a housing counseling program so that people can get their credit in a situation where they can be able to buy, particularly the folks that we were striving to serve. So it was, we were working in historic African-American neighborhoods with families who had never owned. Often they were the first in their family to ever purchase something, land or a house. And so it required some education on the front end. So that same kind of thought started playing into all the other programs that we were doing with land. You can, and then this is what happens. The more you're doing this targeted work, targeted in neighborhoods and in communities, and thinking about civic engagement and how you get people involved, it turned into lots of what I'm sure many of you have done, the charrette model or the dots or the post-it notes or the input sessions, all the different ways you hear from folks what their needs are. And when you're working in a targeted geographic area, it turns out often the things that they're bringing to you aren't just housing needs. There are other needs as well. And that started to drive some of our work. Some of the needs were we want these abandoned homes fixed up because there's drug activity happening there or illegal activity. So we're doing a lot of renovation or rehab or tear down and new build of problem properties. But there was also sometimes properties that were problems that didn't make sense for housing, like it wasn't the right use. But we had an early board member because our board was structured with the third low-income members of the community. And she came to us because she was listening to these conversations about the conservation properties that we were protecting. And she said, there's this vacant lot in my neighborhood, and there's a lot of drug activity happening there. I've heard about this idea of community garden. Could you help us put one in my neighborhood? And so we did. Why not? And then that turned into working with the University of Georgia and other partners to do a network of community gardens, because it turned out other neighborhoods also wanted these. And when this neighborhood tackled the issue of the problem property, it improved everything in the neighborhood. A lot of the illegal activity stopped. Neighbors started getting together. What Greg said about a third space, people were outside working together, and it built community identity and pride in their community. It's being the first community garden. So then it turned into gardens, and then you can go to the next slide, I think, which then turned into this agriculture program, because a lot of the neighborhood gardens wanted to be able to sell the things that they were growing to help with their income. But in our community, you couldn't sell things that were grown in residential areas. So we worked on getting things changed in the zoning code so that they could. But in the meantime, we found other land that they could grow on to sell. So then that turned into, urban farm, which then turned into a second urban farm, and then market opportunities for the growers. And then if you go to the next slide, then it turned into when we're doing these dots and these community feedback, what we were hearing from the younger residents in the neighborhoods were, we need jobs. And we live in a college town. And so there are lots of college kids that come in and take jobs that otherwise high school kids would have. So we started creating job training programs. So we were paying high school youth to learn agriculture skills and start small businesses around agriculture. And so they were getting paid to learn and working with the school system. And then if you go to the next slide, then that turned into some of these students would graduate from the program and be looking for kind of that next step. And then we started finding other farmers that they were apprenticing with or engaged with, who had been locked out of access to government programs for farmers. So we started connecting small farmers to government programs, and then training folks that were interested in farming as a career through classes and education programs. And if you go to the next slide. So then the second urban farm that we started became an incubation farm. So we were leasing out plots to 6 small farmers with a guaranteed market for the things that they're selling was being sold to the school system and other institutional partners. And then it's become an education space for other farm events, other small farmers coming for different workshops or speakers or demonstrations, even just potlucks and like a network where it's, you know, farmers supporting each other with their own network. And then if you'll go to the and actually one thing about that Williams Farm I'll mention, it was a great opportunity. It's a little over 5 acres right in our community, and it happened to be adjacent to 5 acres that we had protected for the neighborhood years before with a trail on it. And then we were able to purchase an adjacent property that is being built out as affordable housing. So it has kind of all three elements of what the land trust is focused on, right in one area that's all walkable. Anyway, okay, you can go to the next slide. And then that started turning into these incubation farmers are looking for access to farms when they graduate from the program. They need access to land that's affordable and reasonable, where they have long-term tenure that they can make investments in. That's one of the struggles is if you don't have good tenure on the land, it's hard to make the investments that you need to make farming work because it's hard enough to make it work. It's hard. It's hard. But so anyway, we've created a FarmLink program that matches farmers who are individuals or families who have farmland that they're not utilizing, but they'd like to still see it farmed. And they're offering up transition programs, long-term leases to new and beginning farmers. So it's they call it like eFarmony, which is like a matchmaking program between farmers and land instead of in a dating app. Anyway, that's okay. So that's FarmLink. Yeah, somebody laughed. Okay, good. And then so I'm trying to rush through so that we can all talk about all this on the back end. So that's my rough overview of a lot of what the Athens Land Trust has been doing, and it continues to spin and grow from there. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and very impressive growth of the subject of farming and how it links to security, to neighborhood pride or sense of belonging, and of course to jobs opportunities. I just have a precise question about one thing you mentioned, that
Yes.
you created a network of community garden and that you managed to have the city council to change the zoning so that these spaces are identified as agricultural land so that the residents could sell the produce. Is it like that?
Kind of. It's more it changed. It's still residential because it's in neighborhoods, but they've changed the rules so that you can grow food to sell in residential areas.
Okay, so you got the full support from the city council on that,
Oh
and
yeah.
they also saw the benefits of these initiatives.
Yeah, it wasn't hard. It was just something that had been neglected for years.
Okay, and these community gardens are still in place, or do you have some that
Some
declined or disappeared?
some are, and then some go away. It fluctuates over time. And um, I think sometimes we can get so focused on having a perfect relationship or the ideal situation where you have tenure. I mean, I'm already telling you it's better if you have tenure because it makes it last longer. But sometimes for cost reasons or whatever the things, just opportunities, we would work with areas where we didn't, churches, a lot of churches we worked with that had extra land. We worked with a lot of the schools. Anyway, and so a lot of those are still thriving, and then some aren't. But the resources are still there, and the water is still there. And what I see sometimes is they fall off for a little while, and then another season or a year goes by, and then someone else finds it and picks it up and starts it up again. So I think just having it available is a win.
Right, thank you very much. So if you have questions for Heather, keep them for the end. And now we will hear from Sandy and Ben. Again, if you can please share the screen for Sandy.
Thank you, Pierre. Yeah, so I'm from Lopez Community Land Trust and really appreciate peer-to-peer learning. When we began, let me see, it was in 1989 is when we put our community land trust together on Lopez Island. And one of the things that you can Do I need to tell you when to go through the slides, or will you just?
If you can just say next when you want Ben to move the
Okay,
slide.
yeah, so you can go to the next one.
Thanks.
Yeah, so 1989, we have a service area of Lopez Island. It's a small island in the state of Washington in San Juan County. And we have two really primary programs: affordable housing, sustainable ag, and rural development. Next. And so since 1989, we do a lot of cooperative neighborhoods. That's probably our main focus. Got some rental housing. And Lopez Island, like I said, is a small, it's a kind of rural place. We have 143 acres of land and 3 agricultural leases. One thing I wanted to tell you is that I really acknowledge those who have gone before us. We have learned a lot from others who have done this work. Some of the founders, Greg mentioned, new communities, and also have a great appreciation of starting with something simple, doing it well, and then moving forward. When we first went to, I think it was 1991 or 2, went to a National Community Land Trust conference in Burlington, Vermont. That is the first time that we really took in that farmland and food security were as integral to community land trusts as housing was. You can go to the next. So we focus on food security, regenerative agriculture, and climate change, in addition to housing. Next. Yeah, and one of the things that has happened for us in the beginning, in the late 80s and early 90s, we were standing on a farm in Vermont, and I recognized there was a gentleman there. He had farmed his whole life. And I think he was second or third generation on this farm in Vermont. And he had tears down his eyes. There were all these young people working around him. And the Community Land Trust had arranged a life estate, and he could no longer work his land. And the Community Land Trust intervened so he could live out his life on that farm. And that's what we tried to do here at Stonecrest Farm, which you can see, we purchased our first farm. It says 2018, but it was actually in 2017. And it was 48 acres, and it was with a life estate. You can do the next slide. And then in 2022, we had another farm, which was 42 acres, called Still Light Farm. And next. And then a couple years later, Barnell Bakery, which was a land purchase of a local bakery. Next. So before we were purchasing land where we live is very, very expensive. You can spend over $1 million on, 20, 30, 40 acres sometimes. And so I'm sorry for the vegans in the crowd, but before we started purchasing land, we did things in support of food security. And one of the first things we did was to get a USDA mobile slaughter unit. So it was a USDA unit that could come to local farms. That was part of our food security. People were having to take their animals off the island, sometimes up to 500-600 miles away from home. This was a very successful co-op of farmers in our region, and really started adding to our local food security and food sovereignty. Next. And then again, land is expensive, but there are all kinds of things you can do. Published a book on farmers, food, and community. We publish a farm guide. We have been doing that for probably 30 years. And one of the nice things about it is that it is a simple way to raise the consciousness and local awareness of your what's happening in agriculture. And part of what happens in your communities, and I think Heather gave really wonderful slides, the progression of what happened in Athens is people start coming to you. They identify you not just as a housing community land trust, but a community land trust that primarily has a mission to hold land in trust for community uses, whether it be agriculture or housing. And they will come to you with different ideas. We have a farm to school program that we started that is probably 25 years old now. This farm product guide, the Bounty book, which celebrates local farmers. Did another publication, Land, Water, Energy, and Resource Use, just giving people this understanding that a community land trust is really a land-based organization, and food sovereignty and local access to food are as important as, the other primary thing that we do, which is housing. Okay, next. One of the other things that is simple for us to do and doesn't take a lot of effort, we have a grain CSA, and this is a partnership with some local farms. They produce all the wheat. They do all the milling for us, and really the Lopez Community Land Trust is a broker for that. And it makes it really easy for the farmers to participate because we do all the advertising, we have all of the contacts with people, and then take all the payment. We make one payment to the farmer, and is all they have to do is notify us when it's all ready, and then people just go to the mill site, pick up their grain, it's already been paid for, and walk away. In addition to having it milled there, we have on our site where our office is, we have just a small mill in case people want to mill their grain, just independently. I think the point is that in addition to expensive and sort of long-term projects, like holding land in trust for hundreds of years, there are ways to bring food security through the community land trust programs. And it is all part of our overall mission of holding land in trust for community-based activities. But you sometimes get to those bigger projects through your local engagement, and it's an awareness building and education. Next. Yeah, so this is, I mentioned the school program. This was a local philanthropist, Farm and Lopez Community Land Trust, who originally established. It's called the Life Lopez Island Farm Education Program. And it has been, I think, going on for 25 years at the local school. And every year, our role now is more to collect funds from our members and pass it on to the school rather than being directly involved. The school has now taken the program inside its own curriculum and operates it. We don't own the land there, but we, have pretty much a very long-term relationship with seeing this and having kids engage with growing food, having a relationship with local food. The food goes from this garden into the school kitchen and is made available for lunches. And a lot of the kids are just so happy to not only grow the food, but have it show up on their plates, Next. Another really simple way that we found, well, it's not always so simple, but we run internship programs. We do these for construction, we do them for renewable energy projects, and we do them for agriculture. And not just on the farms that Lopez Community Land Trust holds the land under, but other farms as well. And this is a way to bring people who are not living on the island, but bringing them to the island to help us with labor needs with our local food security. And they will stay anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months. And, you know, it's livestock to vegetable growing, flowers. Sometimes they'll be involved in research about biochar and compost. And it's a way to introduce younger people to farming, but also introduce our island to younger people because we have an aging population here on Lopez Island. And this is one way, you know, these younger folks, like this year, I think we've gotten 36 inquiries for internships. They will come, they are hosted by local households. They'll do 1 day of work every week with the local host, and then 4 days on a farm or at the school, and learn all kinds of skills. And we have found this to be a very regenerative community activity, not just for the farmers, but for the greater community at all, because they bring, you know, lots of interest in art, music, getting to know each other, just bringing other things to the island that we can use. It also, again, you know, is bringing awareness of our local agriculture to a wider group of people on the island. Next. And then every fall we do a harvest dinner. So again, you know, it's a celebration of local foods, local farmers, all the farmers, you know, who come are celebrated there. They're really important in our community as growers. They're, you know, have their own economic engine here on Lopez Island. And it's just a way to celebrate healthy food, community, and growing. So we do that usually in October. Next. This is another part of our sustainable ag and rural development. It's car share, a little bit outside of, you know, the ag, but again, you know, climate emissions, you know, controlling carbon emissions is all very important to the future of agriculture and food. So we've introduced this car share as something that the Community Land Trust is engaged with. Next. Yeah, so that's the slides that we put together, and there's lots more, of course, to say, but in keeping with our brief introduction of our work, I'll go back to Pierre, and yeah, thank you for that. And we can discuss.
Thank you. Very nice presentation, and congratulations for the work you do there on the island. I was curious about Lopez Island and how many inhabitants it has. I found out just Googling it that it has around 3,000 souls, maybe a bit
Yeah.
more now.
Yeah, about 3,000, and 50% of our homes are occupied full-time. The other 50% are part-time occupied. And there's a huge pressure on housing. You know, we'll have a vacancy rate of about 0 most of the time. So it's always a big shuffle. And the economics, most people make their money here from other than work. So it's through dividends, rents, investments, that kind of thing. And so we have an environment, there's about 200 kids in the school, about 10 to 12% of kids live in community land trust housing. And we have a aging population. So, but some of our programs are in direct response to, you know, what's happening here culturally and just economically on the ground. So, yeah.
And so you're quite close to Vancouver and to Seattle, so I guess there is like secondary homes and lots of real estate pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So thank you. Is there any question? Feel free to either raise your hand on Zoom for anybody, or to write questions in the chat if you are more comfortable with this way of asking questions. It can be for either Sandy, Heather, or Greg, or of course you can also share your own experiences in the field of around agriculture and food production related to CLTs. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? Yes, I see there's a hand raised from Fran.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those presentations. Heather, I love how you iterated. It's such an iterative process, and you really, in the slides and in your presentation, show that. I wondered, I'm an attorney, and I work a lot with Kristen King-Reese, who's also on the phone, and we're kind of constantly thinking about this question about CLT on ag land, and also including how to make it work for the IRS and make it fit within charitable purposes. And I wondered how you all decide who is farming on CLT land, whether you have set criteria, whether it's more murky, how you do that. That's my question. Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. It's really good. Great.
Okay, I guess I'll go first, Sandy. So our programs were really targeting African American farmers and groups and young people. So like the incubation program that I mentioned, I think all 6 are Black female farmers they're growing. So I think to your IRS and attorney question, from my reading of and who knows how long this will stay this way, but from what it says currently, if you're supporting historically underserved groups that have had disenfranchised, haven't had access, then you're okay. So I think we were okay under those terms. Yeah, that that that's how we did it.
Yeah. And according to our, IRS letter, so first of all, we put out a request for proposals. It talks about the land, talks about food security, talks about people, primarily serving the island in their production. And then there's a clause that says they have to be disadvantaged in the marketplace. And so since it costs a couple of $1 million that you'd have to have to get set up with a farm on Lopez Island, almost everyone that is a young farm family can meet that criteria. So we have, kind of a lengthy request for proposals. It's distributed. Well, sometimes we distribute it locally first, then we'll go through our state network, through ag guilds and that, and then sometimes we go out nationally, depending on who we can find. People can't really make a living in farming here, so oftentimes they have to have secondary jobs, doing tractor repair, value added, something like that. So it's not necessarily for everyone, but yeah, that's how we look at it. And I think it fits, quite well within what the IRS rules are.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. We have Tom next.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful presentations. I wondered if you could talk about the connection between your farmland and the farmers and your housing, is there a connection? Because in the UK, there are CLTs sort of involved in both activities, but if you were to provide affordable housing, it would normally be for anybody in the area in need of housing. And there are people here interested in access to housing for land workers who are typically quite low paid, but wouldn't be a very high priority compared to what others within the community in terms of housing need, and so would not tend to get allocated what we call social housing. And it's just interesting about, would a CLT be in the business both of meeting wider housing needs in their community and also specifically reserving homes for those land workers that are accessing their farmland? I don't know if you're in your cases or if Greg could speak to others in the US are making that direct connection as well.
Thank you. Whoever wants to start. Heather?
Well, I think that's some of what Fran was getting at, the challenge of how you prioritize farm workers for available housing. Basically, we didn't figure that out. I mean, we had like farm managers that were renting properties on the farm from the CLT at affordable prices to be able to manage and train other farmers. But one of the challenges that we've had, and I'd be curious what Sandy has to say, but um, to her point about how hard it is to farm and make a living doing it, so often what I saw were folks coming in and trying it for a period of time and then moving on. And so even if you build affordable housing adjacent to a farm, it could very well be that the first family that buys the home at an affordable price doesn't isn't the family that continues to farm it over time. And so it's hard to put restrictions in saying you can only have this housing if you're going to farm, and then if you're not going to farm, you've got to go. And we just didn't wade into that because it's pretty messy. So I don't know, Sandy, I'm curious what you do.
We're the same way. I mean, we build affordable housing in we're in a rural place, but it's called urban growth areas. So you can do up to 12 units per acre. The farms that we have, I mean, sometimes it's R40, so you can do one house per 40 acres, sometimes one house per 20 acres. A lot of times it's ag resource lands. You can't do multiple housing there. We are not, we don't consider it an advantage to anyone to have housing tied to work. Although we did just sell one house adjacent to some farmland for folks, in providing food security. And we have a clause in there saying that if they get out of that and into another type of work, we can, not that we will, raise their lease fee. Okay, that's it. But we never want to tell people that they can't live in a home if they aren't doing particular type of work. That said, there are people that work in farms or some aspect of food security that just live in our housing, and they're not directly linked, they're just indirectly linked. Again, we're on a small island and people often do multiple jobs, and they'll take advantage of housing wherever they can find it. But because there's such limited housing, we never want to link work with housing.
Does this answer your question, Tom, or do you have like other examples from the CLTs in England and Wales that you would like to share?
It mostly does, yeah. I mean, we have a long history of tied housing, but that would be associated with, large private estates, and that has a problematic history. So I can understand the like not wanting to do tied housing. I suppose it's just when allocating a home, would you take any account of the kind of their somebody's desire to be involved in, say, rural economic development and farming and so on? Is that ever part of the selection criteria, or is that sort of if that's the purposes of the CLT? Is that because we've not seen any of that happening over here, and I'm interested in whether that could, people here are interested in whether you could do that and whether that would be in line with the CLT's ethos and objectives, as well as questions about the different legal contexts and funding rules and so on in different parts of the UK.
Sandy and Heather, if you want to answer, and then we can go to Greg. Sandy?
Oh, Heather, do you want to go?
No, you go ahead. You go first. That's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Can you rephrase that for me? Because I'm having a hard time entering into this discussion. I'm thinking we're coming from different contexts, and I'm trying to find a good link.
Greg
Would you mind?
seems to want to intervene. Maybe Greg, if you want to rephrase or make the link between both contexts.
So, Heather and Sandy have more experience with this than I do. I want to point out there's a really good resource. It's called Preserving Farms for Farmers, and it's put out by Equity Trust, which is a US-based nonprofit, and they focus on rural agriculture very specifically. And as part of that, they're addressing the issue of not just land for cultivation, but also the houses for the farmers. I think one thing, if you're looking at rural agriculture where there'll be land for cultivation plus housing, you want to work with experienced farmers. I mean, that's really, I think, just an essential thing. In an urban context, it's different because there's housing nearby, and the two are obviously related, but they don't have to be on the same piece of land. So anyway, I really recommend that resource and also just their website. And then while I have a second, this book that Sandy referenced in one of her slides, which I grabbed a copy of. I think, Sandy, when I was in Chicago, when you were getting the Home Depot award, which used to be a really cool thing until they changed the award. But this is a fantastic resource and something people should check out. That's it.
Thanks, Greg. So yeah, I don't know, Sandy or Heather, if you have any other comment, or we can take
I
another.
guess it's a little different, but one of the partnerships that we had built was with a national conservation organization, and they were creating a farm access program kind of tied to what we were doing. And we were putting in a conservation easement on farmland as a way to bring the price down. And then they were finding new and beginning farmers, but not new and beginning, but farmers who were ready to move to the next level of farming. So they had a history of farming at a certain scale and they were ready to scale up. And then they were selling the farm to those farmers at a reduced rate. But just thinking it through after your question, it's like, well, there's no affordability restrictions in that. And maybe there's a smarter way to structure it. But it has so many moving pieces and impact investors that are investing to hold the farm long enough to put the easement on for the new farmers to buy. But anyway, there's probably something there that could be expanded on and thought through a little better. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that it's just now when I'm articulating it, I realize it could have been better.
One thing about here in the Northwest, there are a lot of different groups doing a lot of different things. Like in the islands here, we have a county land bank. They tend to do just as you said, purchase land, put easements on it, and then sometimes we interact with them for then we would purchase the land and manage the long-term lease, and they just manage the conservation easement. There's also Viva Farms. They do exactly what you're talking about. They do incubator farms and then they find other farms. Lopez Island is a place where the land is just so expensive. It's really impossible for people to enter into this arena without that. So for the part of the Lopez Community Land Trust, what we're looking at is, keeping it quite simple. We look for farmers who have some experience and a business plan, who can actually envision themselves, living for their lifetime. Maybe it doesn't always work out, but that's what they really envision, and they know that's what they want to do. There are lots of ways, I think, to enter into this, but again, context really matters. And so we're, a staff of 3 people. We live on a high-priced island. We want to secure farmland. We want to encourage local food production. So we try to just, nest our programs within the context of where we are. And then we are so dependent on this network of, farm organizations, ag organizations, other conservation organizations to interact with, and not be all things to all people.
Thank you. I don't see another hand raised. If there are questions, please do raise your hands. And also, there's lots of CLTs here from different countries, and probably with either questions or experiences to share. So we still have half an hour. If someone wants to talk from their about their CLT, their experience, feel free to share your knowledge with us. Is there anyone who wants to come? Yep, we have someone here. Please, Sunita.
Hi, yes, my name is Sunita. I'm a Whatcom Planning Commissioner here in Washington State. And I've been studying and learning about community land trusts for approximately 15 years. I had the pleasure of being in Israel, Palestine on kibbutzim, which is the model that was viewed in the 60s during the civil rights movement. And my connection to environmental justice and climate justice is deep rooted through an anthropological lens through my studies. And that is why we created the first hemp lime construction, or using a agricultural based material like hemp for our housing, our ADUs, additional dwelling units. And we're brand new. We just started Northwest Living and Learning Community Collaborative. And so we're really trying our best to work with private owners as well that want an ADU, since our state laws are allowing for this missing middle bill, House Bill 1110. So we're just learning and growing. So if there's anyone out there on this call or that has connections to the Pacific Northwest that would like to help us, we've done 3 workshops to show the construction method of using hemp, lime, and water for building homes. And we're really excited just to start officially with being taxed, getting all the paperwork involved with the state and the federal government. So we're just learning and listening, and really glad to see so many people on this call. So thank you for the time to talk a little bit about Northwest Living and Learning Community Collaborative.
Thank you. Feel free to share in the chat the link to your organization. It may be of interest of people on the call. Is there any other question or comment? Of course, people like Greg, Heather, Sandy, if you have questions for each other, you can also use this time, and also if there's something that you had not prepared but you would like to say about your CLTs, feel free to.
I want to say
start.
a little
Yeah.
something. I think for everybody, we're in a time where there are just tumultuous changes, whether it is climate, economic injustice, food sovereignty, whatever it is. We all live in and can be very hyper local in how we respond. And I think that, that's what you see, whether it's Greg giving an overview of where, agriculture and CLTs have been, Heather specifically in Athens, and then us here on Lopez. And I think that one of the, these are all very they're big and daunting issues, and to enter in sometimes can feel overwhelming. But one of the things I really like about peer-to-peer learning is that there's something that seems to always come up that I can get inspired by and think, oh, well, we could do that. It will be our starting place, our beginning place. Place-based activity is really important and grounding for all of us. We can get so I think scattered, and we don't want to. We want to be awake in our place and be very grounded in it and be responsive and very present to what's unfolding. And one of the things I really adore about Community Land Trust is I think it is a tool that is so flexible and so responsive. The more that you know about a community, the more a community land trust can serve its highest and best needs at any given moment in time. In 1989, when we began, housing prices had gone up 190% in that year. That was the trigger point for us to start. And so we focused on housing, even though we wanted to focus on ag because like I said, we had seen it in Vermont and knew we wanted to do that. It was almost 25, 30 years later that we really, started to focus on agriculture. And it was because in our community, housing was so dire and we were really in danger of losing the community of people that made this place work. We're ferry served, so we could have easily become a gated community. We still are in many ways, but the Community Land Trust, and by adopting it and holding it and starting simple, doing it well. When Greg first started out, he mentioned, the power of starting with something simple and doing it very well. People then start to be attracted to you. You've done something, it may look simple, but you've done it and it has this ripple effect. And I want us to keep being accessible to each other in those ways, and inspiring each other with our local actions that may not, be able to be lifted from a rural island to an urban area. But I think that sometimes the systems, the threads of them are available to us. And it's that we can take forth and start to take root. And again, I just think community land trusts are a very, very flexible model and offer every community endless opportunities to respond so that we can be caretakers of the land. We can repair land that has, we as humans are so interesting because we can do the greatest damage and then we can make the most beautiful things in relationship, with land. And I think all of that is really important, that essentially community land trusts are about caretaking of land, each other, community, and all of that. So I just wanted to put that out there for all of us.
Thank you, Sandy. We have a hand up from Valentine or Valentine.
Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me to this session. And hi, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm so excited to be here and to see so many great friends. I have a comment in response to one of the questions in the chat and a question. This is very, very new work in the context of the history being shared here, but in the upper Midwest in the US context. I'm here in Minneapolis, and in the last 5 or 6 years, there's an effort that is in kind of community with the network of agrarian trusts, agrarian commons efforts that's called Commons Land. And a huge part of that has been trying to start with this question of what it means to have community land trusts on land that's dominated by settler title programs. And so the effort started with saying basically, how do we both use the community land trust model in agriculture, but also understand agriculture in community with indigenous agriculture? And so a lot of those conversations have been, how do we start to build, so basically like build a habit into budgeting that's like a land back, land restoration, solidarity payments. So like not to be part of the community land trust, but to be in relationship with other CLTs that are starting up that are indigenous led. And then to start to work in community with those groups to say like, are there right of first refusal practices or like ways that people can start thinking about the whole titling process differently, that every time this land has an opportunity to check in, like who are the different entities, regardless of who has tribal status here now, like who historically has relationship with this land and would want to have or has built capacity to consider. So we're really thinking about land back as an iterative and relational process that is like a question that always lives with the land. So that's kind of a like one example in this place, which I recognize is intensely privileged because especially, like Indian Land Tenure Foundation is headquartered, like there's just a lot of infrastructure to have those conversations. And I think one of the things we have learned in this is it's super important not to set the bar so high that nothing can happen. Like to how what conversations are possible with the kind of developing settler colonial land title, but like little things like being very careful to think about like who holds title of this land rather than to like reify land ownership. Like little things like that have been important. And a question, which is sort of related to this, is, and I apologize if this is addressed at the beginning, but have there been kind of metrics or frameworks or approaches to thinking about what it means to retain affordability in farmland while also allowing some equity building for farmers on land? So like the biggest challenge we have faced is that question, like what are the metrics or rules of thumb or practices people are using to respect the soil building and infrastructure building or like relationship building around farm enterprises so that can be valued? Because so much of the literature we're drawing on is about housing and not about farms.
Thank you. So Heather and Sandy, if you want to answer or give your opinion on that, and also on the land back and decolonization aspect that was mentioned before, because it was also a question from Jacob in the chat. So feel free to elaborate on both aspects. And Greg is also raising a hand, but yeah, Sandy.
Yeah, so land back is it's complex and of course painful, right? Being colonizer from that aspect. I think, in this place where we live, the greatest place that I've seen them have advantage is on a neighboring island where there is someone of great wealth just able to purchase and regift our the land to the local tribes. Yeah, it's a conversation we've been involved with, and I'm afraid to say haven't made a lot of headway in it, but listening, to the conversations, and we're always thinking about how do we enter into this conversation in a meaningful way, respectful way. Yeah, it's a question of our time, right? And then I think the Equity Trust, I think Greg mentioned the book that they had. We have typically, when we've done farm leases, worked with them and to come up with ground leases where we can acknowledge long-term affordability and also their soil building. You know, a lot of times farming is just about extraction. You extract everything you can as fast as you can because that's what the marketplace is requesting of you. And it is how you can stand to be, you know, a farmer and make any headway with it economically. And I think that the thing is with a community land trust and farmers, we're interrupting that pattern and setting it up economically in the beginning to say we're going to interrupt that. And the way we're going to interrupt that extractive relationship with the land is by raising funds to, you know, basically lower the entry point where people come in and making it affordable to lease the land and acknowledging in the lease the importance and significance of building the soils. And there's all kinds of ways to, I think, soil tests now that they're, you know, were not so easy before. And community land trusts can actually give a lesser lease fee, right, if that is happening through the practices. But I think any of this, you know, we as community land trusts are in a constant state of interrupting the marketplace. And we do that by transferring wealth. You know, we get wealth from wealthy folks, and we, you know, invest in land, and then others get to benefit from that. It's complex, and I think, again, as I said, I think we have to start, and then we have to keep engaging in listening and recognizing the time we're in and change with it as community land trust, whether we're talking about land back, climate, carbon sequestration, and all the rest of those issues. But I really am appreciating this conversation and the turn that it just took with your questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sandy. Maybe Greg, if you want to answer these aspects, and then we can hear from Ben.
So I'll address two different things. So we, Valentine, first of all, it's good to see you. We did a webinar featuring Indigenous-led CLTs in December. If you haven't checked that out, we can share a link to the recording on that, because it talked about some of the issues that you had mentioned, and that's a thread we hope to continue to focus on in 2026. I think you also had a question about how do farmers build equity, and that's a challenge when you're on leased land. You don't have, I mean, farmers in a rural context need to borrow money for seed, to purchase farm equipment. They have no equity in the land. How do they access that? And that is, being on leased land is a challenge for sure. I worked a bit with Colshan CLT 10 or 15 years ago, and they were looking at an a rural agriculture program that ultimately didn't move forward. But what we had talked about was establishing co-ops for equipment, so farmers could share equipment. So each farmer doesn't have to bear the cost of buying very expensive equipment. And I think in a rural context, if CLTs are going to be involved, how do we address the issue of being able to borrow needed money in order to be a farmer? And I think that's, you know, that's a challenge. I expect Equity Trust has dealt with that issue over the years and might have some really good stuff to say about that. That's it.
Thank you, Greg. Ben, you took your hand down, so I assume you don't have equipment anymore, or do you?
I do. It's really more of a question to kind of plant among everybody So hi everybody, my name is Ben. I'm the communications director. I'm the one who's been bothering all of you with reminder emails. And I'm really, really excited to see all of you here today. I just kind of have, well, I guess I have two questions. One is specific to this particular session. And then the second question is in general regarding the climate justice workshops that we're organizing. So I'm not trying to steer away from what we're talking about at all, actually. Um, the first question is in relation to this session. I'm honestly very curious, and I'll send around an exit survey after this anyway. So if you don't respond here, you can do so afterward. But I'm curious to see what your motivation was for coming to this event. And I think that it'll just be interesting to hear from you what you wanted to hear, or what questions you still have. That's my first question. And then the second one is just in relation to these climate justice workshops that we're organizing on a pretty regular monthly basis, where we address different topics. I'm curious to see, what else might you be interested in, as it may connect to this topic or something else. So, just anybody feel free to react, raise your hand, write in the chat. And again, I'll be sending recordings of this session afterward. But yeah, I'm curious what brings you here today, if anybody wants to ask or answer.
Yes, we have a hand raised. Yes, I see CT Mendoza.
Yeah, good morning. My interest in this was to really to see if there's any, nuggets about building policy for upping the agricultural CLT movement, because there's a lot that is documented for housing CLTs, lots of conferences around that, but really not so much in terms of ag-based CLTs. So I wanted some information.
Could you just let us know from what organization you are, or
I
this
am
is
with
for
the
everybody
Central
when you...
California Environmental Justice Network in Fresno, California.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone want to answer or risk an answer about policy?
I have a not very positive answer, maybe, but one of the things for the affordable housing side of Community Land Trust is that for the most part, all of these organizations are accessing the same type of funding, for good or for bad, and who knows if that funding is going to be available, but federal funds that subsidize the cost of the housing. And so there's some similarities and commonalities in how these programs are working that these conferences and policies can kind of answer. But on the ag side, I don't see that same consistency with a source of funds that makes this possible. And honestly, I've been sitting here kind of brooding and sulking a little bit, because with some of these conversations, thinking about, land back and um, Sandy's talking about raising money and getting money from the wealthy to be able to help. And I feel like, one, maybe I wasn't that good at that, but also I think when you're already in a location that is high in poverty, low in resources, it makes all those things feel even more impossible. And so if there's not a source that's available, it becomes this conversation of only places that have that can continue to do the right thing, whatever that is. So anyway, I guess maybe that's part of the policy request is, and it may not be the right time for this. And maybe it's a national foundation, funders that are interested in agriculture, finding ways to create funding sources that can make this more consistent, that can build something that becomes bigger. I don't know. That's just rambling thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the equity trust, I think they've done probably more on this subject than anyone. I don't know if people ever work with American Farmland Trust, which is a national organization. I just think wherever we are, there is a way that we need to enter into the conversation and draw these things out. I mean, you're right. Housing has, there's a place where people enter into it, and whether they're doing rental housing or ownership or co-ops or condos, people all congregate around basically the same resources. And so I think those of us who work, especially hyper local, we have to develop and sort of bring those resources out into the open because they're not as obvious. But I think they're still there, and it's as hard as it is to focus on them and bring them out is an important aspect of our work, and then sharing those.
Thank you. Greg, if you want to discuss, and maybe we can also afterwards ask the perspective from Maria-Olga, if you want to, Maria-Olga, to hear from your CLT in Puerto Rico, which may be a slightly different context and other approaches that you have. But first, Greg, yeah.
I just want to mention there's one consistent national source of funding for community gardens, and that's CDBG. So it doesn't solve all problems, but
Can you say what CDBG is for non-US people?
it's the Department of Housing and Urban Development has a community development block grant program that provides funding in all parts of the US. And an allowable use of those funds is to fund the establishment of community gardens, which you could use potentially for land acquisition, building out infrastructure, etc. Again, those funds are constrained, but that's just one that exists nationally in the US.
Thank you, Greg.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Maria-Olga, if you want to intervene, feel free to, or if anybody else has questions or comments. And then as we are going to close the session in a moment, feel free also to put comments and more questions in the form that will come to you. Also, if in terms of format, you would have appreciated to be working in breakout sessions with smaller groups to be able to discuss more in depth, or whatever could be useful for us for next sessions. I see Maria-Olga turn on her camera, so feel free to share your experience from Puerto Rico.
Hi, hola, Maria Olga Reyes. I'm here with Francois Mar from Fiticas, which is it's an agrarian community land trust in the islands of Puerto Rico. I'm really happy to be here and listening to your stories and how you guys have walked these paths. We basically started as a CLT without money or land, but our mission really is to protect farmland, to pass the use of land to agroecology farmers, and with an awareness of the importance of living on or close to the land, so that farming is economically sustainable. And so many of the issues that you guys have been raising is part of what we are thinking through and trying to think through with people who don't have access to land. We have one territory that we protect that was donated to us, and that's the first land that we're aiming to pass its use. We're in the midst of establishing the bylaws for the land trust with landless farmers, and in these conversations, a lot of what has been shared here comes up, like what happens if people enter and then they change their mind about what they're going to do, but they're living in the house, or who continues the project after the main members move on. And so these are questions that obviously many of us are thinking through, and it would be really awesome if we have a space to continue talking with others who are in different stages of this journey, or different points of this journey. The issue of co-op housing is very interesting and important for us, because historically in Puerto Rico, we've seen how state initiatives that make farmland accessible have to change, or been forced, or their thinking has changed as as access changes from one generation to the next. So people who've got access to land through a public program, who are at a different stage of their lives, but the next generation are not going to continue, then that land is stayed unused or sold to other purposes. And so when as we're in this process of establishing sort of, okay, so what are the general agreements that we all can live by? We talk a lot about how we relate to land and housing as commons rather than as pathway to that sense of equity where you eventually can get a loan on community property. So that's why I put that comment there, because I would benefit from hearing other perspectives on equity and how it helps people, because what we see here is that when people who don't really have capital or more than one property on their name, they sell what they have, they rarely have enough money to secure housing in the next, right? So the next housing. So we're kind of like trying to not to repeat history and what we are seeing contemporaneously happening. But it also requires an imagination that we're slowly trying to evoke and nurture. An imagination that is, how can we secure tenure for the long term, even for the next generations of people who are continuing projects, without that passing through a model of ownership that might make it more difficult for the next generation to have access to land and housing.
Yeah. Gracias, Maria Olga. And as you mentioned also about agroecology, there's a question, we don't have time anymore, but maybe there's also food for thought about if CLTs necessarily promote organic agriculture and better practices for health and the environment, or if it's possible for CLTs to have more conventional like agricultures, because it is what is locally more present, or what the role is of CLTs also in educating farmers and landlords in having other types of relations to nature and of course health, which can seem like it's logical that all goes together, but maybe it does not in practice. Maybe a final word from Sandy and Heather, if you want to say anything about the last reflections, and then I'll give the floor to Ben for an announcement before we close. Sandy?
Yeah, thank you all so much for this conversation, and I really appreciated what Marioga just had to say about just about everything. So thank you for ending with that. Yeah, appreciate you all, and carry on.
Thanks for pulling this together, Pierre and Greg and Ben. And I think for me, it just highlights all the conversations that still need to be had to help figure out what the solutions are, because I do feel like we kind of wallow around in uncertainty, and you just try things. I don't know that I'm like Sandy and start with the small thing and do it well. I feel like do a bunch of things, probably not that well, just to try to figure out what's going to work. And so I'm happy to have another conversation about all the things that didn't work. Anyway, so thanks for having me, and I definitely want to continue these conversations.
Thank you. We'll think about future events and maybe others about these topics. And maybe Greg, before we hear from Ben, if you have any final comment or invitation, Greg.
I just want to say this Zoom meeting has been very exciting for me. I can remember back in 2005, where it was very difficult to get anybody interested in CLTs and agriculture, and now there's so much more interest, and it's just very, very encouraging. So thank you all for coming.